Hello, I'm Jesse with Living Tree Community Foods, and we're here on the UC Berkeley campus to understand something more about climate changes here in California. And we're going to be taking a long-term view indeed. We're here, we have the honor to be here with Professor Lynn Ingram, who happens to be a paleoclimatologist. So my first question to her would be, just what does a paleoclimatologist do?
Well, what we do is we're usually earth scientists, and we study the natural archives of climate that are on Earth. Mm-hmm. So this is periods of time before humans were actually recording the climate. So we have to look at evidence that's contained in these natural archives. And what I mean by that is things like tree rings, sediment cores from lakes, sediment cores like from San Francisco Bay is another place we look.
Sediment cores.
Right. Places where we can look at fossils, or we can look at just different things that have recorded naturally what climate was doing in the past over thousands of year time scale.
So you actually count the rings of trees that have turned to stone. Is that more or less correct?
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, these trees are still living. So these are the trees, like the redwoods, or the bristlecone pines. Some of these trees are actually around for thousands of years. But there are some trees that are also dead, and have been lithified or have turned to stone. So those would give you a even longer record of climate.
Amazing. Well, you have to be incredibly patient and painstaking indeed for exacting work of that sort. And I have nothing but admiration for the learning and the zealousness and the forethought that has to go into a study of that sort. Now, California, in the last 150 years, which according to what I've been reading about your work, the last 150 years have been relatively wet as far as the long-term scenario of California climate goes. And during this time, we have to admit that the people of this nation, of this state, have been particularly zealous, because in just 150 years, California has become the world's 10th largest economy. And not only that, it is now this nation's top agricultural producer, and it's also a leader in information technology, and all this in a semi-arid environment, which is an extraordinary achievement. With 38 million people, we're living in the most populous state. And now it seems to me, from what I've been reading and understanding, however, that things are changing rapidly. We are on, it seems, or it would appear to be, a slow-moving train, a train that's approaching a catastrophe indeed, and that's what we're here to discuss and to talk about. So I would like to begin with a question. Do you still maintain that this year could be the driest year in 500 years of California history?
Well, to date, it could be. I mean, if we don't, assuming we don't have any major storms for the rest of the water year, then we're still on track for being drier than 1976-77, which in turn was drier than, or was as dry as 1580, according to the tree ring, looking at tree rings. So we, at a minimum, we'll probably be amongst the 3 driest years in the last 500 years.
In the last 500 years or so. That is amazing, because the 1976 drought was certainly severe enough, and people, you had rations, you had a rationing system which was not only on agriculture and industry, but it also impinged upon individuals here in California too. So it was very, very severe.
Oh,
So
yeah, I remember because I lived here.
You lived there, so you have
I
to
was
know.
a teenager, and I remember, short showers and our
about
yard.
showers and about flushing the toilet and all of that.
I lived through that. So
that must have been an heroic time indeed.
Yeah.
So, and I understand that you have published a book with a rather stirring or with a confrontational title, "The West Without Water." And you might want to, if I might show you might want to show the book right there. When did the book appear?
Oh, the book was published in August of 2013. So just a few months ago.
Just a few months ago. I understand.
It's the UC Press.
I understand. So my first question is this: by West, do you mean just California, or do you include also Oregon, Washington, and even British Columbia?
So we're mainly talking about California and the Southwest, and kind of the lower states. The lower states. Right.
I see.
And yes.
But it seems to me, from what I've been hearing in the news, that in Oregon too, they're having a particular dry season right now, at least much more than they've had in quite a long period of time. So it might extend as far as Oregon.
Right, and I mean they do have droughts and dry periods, but on average they do get more precipitation.
I understand. Okay. So my question is this necessarily: what are the basic themes and premises of your book?
Well, so we reviewed all of the paleoclimate research for this region, so not just our own, but other researchers. And one of the things that stands out is climate is extremely variable. So we can go from wet to dry. You often do not get the average. You'll either have extremely wet periods or very dry periods. And it's closely tied to conditions in the Pacific Ocean. So ocean temperatures seem to control our water resources here in the West. And then we've also seen, periods of longer drought than we've seen in the last 150 years. So the 6-year droughts we've seen from 1928 to 34 and from 1987 to 92 were relatively mild compared to the length of droughts we've seen in the past. That seem to be fairly regularly recurring droughts. They're not all as dry as the single year droughts though. So, 76, 77 and this year and 1580 were extremely dry single years, whereas these extended droughts are maybe 60 to 70% of average. So that's the good news, is that we'll still have. I'm not saying it's going to be completely without water. That title might be a little alarming that way, but just saying that we do need to kind of prepare for the fact that we might be going into one of these longer dry spells, and we should really be preparing and with every kind of conservation method we can to kind of prepare for that.
I certainly understand, and I certainly see. Why do you? Okay, so basically, you have spoken of short 6-year drought cycles, which I can understand. But beyond this, or maybe superimposed upon this 6-year-old cycle, you also posit much longer-term cycles, perhaps.
Right. Yeah, we actually see that in these paleoclimate records, that there were longer cycles of decades. Of wet and dry. And so, we've seen these longer droughts in the past, and so it's because we've seen them occurring pretty regularly in the past, we could go into one, because the climate tends to repeat itself over time, and so we can't predict exactly though when it will come or if it's started. You know, I know some people are saying, oh, this could be the start of a mega drought, and it could be, but we don't know that for sure actually.
If it was a start, of what sort of duration could we expect for such a mega drought, just based on what we've seen in the past?
Okay, well, based on what we've seen on the past, we have seen things anywhere from, you know, a decade or two to up to, you know, a century of, you know, of drier than average. I'm not saying it's like as dry as this year, but, you know, somewhat maybe 30 to 40% decrease of the average.
So that would be a catastrophic challenge indeed, or you know, or so what one would think. And the reason why this hits home to us, indeed, because we have a company here in Berkeley with Living Tree Community Foods, and our business is based upon the California almond.
Right.
California, as you know, produces 80% of the world's almonds. Far more than Spain, the south of France, Italy, Turkey combined. And not only that, but the quality of the almonds produced here are far superior to anything produced as far as flavor, taste, and appearance. They are far superior to anything you will find anywhere else. Almonds are a $4 billion crop. So, and I understand that almonds require considerably more water than tomatoes, broccoli, cabbage, or so forth. So therefore, we are considerably concerned because almonds are the second leading principal agricultural crop here in California. In fact, if you go out, if you drive out into the Central Valley in a week's time from now, you're going to see the annual miracle. The whole Central Valley along the 5 is going to be a sea of blossoms. This is the great miracle indeed. As far as the eye can see, something like 500,000 acres have been planted out in almond orchards. It is something very special indeed. In addition to almonds, the state also grows more than 80% of the nation's broccoli, cauliflower, celery, and artichokes. And there are forecasts out and about that we might expect to see price increases of 10% or more for these crops in the coming months. So it's not just California's problem, it's everyone's problem, everywhere. Now, one aspect of your work, which I found not easy to understand in light of what you've said, is that you also speculate on the possibility of a major flood in the Central Valley. You have, in my understanding, in 1861, the valley was under 10 feet of water, which is unbelievable, which is so hard to fathom. So my question is this still a real or genuine possibility? And somehow, in my simple-minded way, the prospect of a flood in the Central Valley somehow seems in contradiction to the prospect of a severe drought.
Right,
So
yes. Yeah, and we actually have a chapter in the book that talks about the 1861-62 flood because it was amazing and it was documented by people. So this was actually historical. It's not just from our paleoclimate. But what our paleoclimate records show, we can see these flood layers from oxbow lakes in the Central Valley. You take a sediment core and you literally can see the flood layers and date them, and you see that these huge floods occurred every 1 to 200 years, and so over the last 2,000 years. So we, for whatever reason, just every 1 to 2 centuries, you see one of these really big floods. And so from that, it's like an earthquake. We can't predict when it will strike, but we know that this has been a regularly occurring thing, and it occurs when storms come from the tropics. They're called atmospheric river storms.
Atmospheric river storms.
Right, and these actually provide 30 to 50% of our water resources. Even though they produce flooding because they're these warm storms that produce a lot of rain in California. So they're kind of a double-edged sword. They're useful, obviously, for our water resources, but it's just a lot of water all at once. And so the problem is, in the future with warming, it will get drier in the region, but at the same time, a warmer planet is going to cause more evaporation of the ocean. So this source of the water from the tropics will actually get more moisture evaporating, and potentially even bigger storms coming from the tropics to California. So if we can figure out how to store that water underground or somewhere,
or whatever,
to last through the drier periods, I mean, that's what we need to do somehow, is when we do have wetter times, try to bank the water in underground aquifers, or figure out ways of storing water.
I see. So at least there is some possibility. So we do not have an absolute contradiction here between sustained droughts and possibilities of catastrophic flooding from time to time. We don't, but at least there is something that we can do if we could build or enhance the reservoir system. That might possibly be a mitigation to some degree. Now, to get back to the last 150 years, which were relatively wet. And in which these 150 years we took advantage of, with the population exploding to its present 38 million inhabitants here in California. Now, however, the Anasazi civilization, which flourished here in the Southwest, I understand, collapsed 800 years ago. And this was due to a series of droughts, much like, I imagine, the sort of thing that we are currently seeing. So my question would naturally arise is, do you have a concept of what a sustainable population here in California would look like? How far overstretched or overextended are we?
To be honest, I don't actually know how far we. I mean, I'm sure there's people that are looking more into that aspect of it. But I can say that the Anasazi, when it was wetter before those droughts, those populations did grow. They're seen in the archaeological record. And then when the droughts hit, they were much more vulnerable to being affected by the droughts, because they had a larger population dependent on the limited water. So, I would say, it seems like we're kind of there. I mean, I don't see that we should grow any further, even though we're projected to continue growing, which amazes me. But I just think that we've pretty much stretched it to the limit now, is what I can tell.
I understand completely. So therefore, we have to think about sustainability and about reservoirs and so forth. I would just mention, or I would just put it, I don't expect you to answer this, but I would just put to you, what does this have to do with building a high-speed rail system in the Central Valley, which is going to consume billions upon billions? And what is this great project that they're talking about right now, about 30-mile tunnels under 30-mile tunnels, which are not meant to store water, but to simply facilitate its transmission to more parched areas in Southern California. So I wonder if we have got our goals and proprietary and priorities correct. So it's just a thought. I have a friend, Joe Karlinski, and he's a lifelong and profound student of atmospheric dynamics. And he's asked me to put to you a couple questions.
Okay.
The first question is, has there ever been an episode of rapidly alternative, or has there ever been an episode of rapidly alternating climate changes? In other words, not a simple one-way change in any single direction, but rapid alternations from one extreme to another, from very hot to very cold to very wet to very dry. Do we see any evidence of this, of very rapid changes from one extreme to another? Is there anything like that in the archaeological record?
Yes, I mean, we do see that. And so that actually is what we see, is that climate just, you see very rapid shifts in climate. I mean, there's also there's different cycles though. So there's a longer term cycle, and then these rapid things are sort of superimposed on that.
Superimposed on that.
Right, so we do see though for sure that the climate does vary pretty rapidly in the past.
I see. So Joe goes on to say that the big issue is how fast can the ecology, how fast can the ecology adapt to rapid changes, to such rapid changes? And he wants to know, is there any data on that in the paleontological record?
Yeah. So there is this is something the paleontologists look more at, but they have seen shifts in climate that allow for you have ecosystems that are shifting along with climate. And the problem today is that the ecosystems have all these other stresses on them that are making it harder for them to keep up and to shift along with climate change that's happening today. And in some ways what we're doing today is more rapid than in the past.
Than anything we previously experienced. I understand that, indeed. Then Joel goes on to say, he wants to know, if the whole West Coast becomes a desert for a century or two, how long would it take the ecosystem to recover after the climate returned to what it was before?
So you're saying if it was like the medieval drought, the medieval warm period? Well, so that, in that case, I don't know if it really became a desert. I mean, it was maybe 60% the average precipitation.
60%, okay.
Yeah, so it wasn't like it, just shifted to like everything becoming a desert, although things did become on average drier. And things did recover after that. So I think there was enough moisture to sort of maintain the ecosystems, and they recovered after that.
I see.
In the past.
And do you have a handle as to just after this pattern of severe drought, just how long it took for grasses, trees, and fauna and whatever to sort of recover and get back to more usual or normal patterns?
Well, so we've taken sediment cores in the tidal marshes around San Francisco Bay, and we actually saw a shift in the marsh vegetation during that drought to a more salt-adapted types of plants. So more like saltgrass and cordgrass became more prevalent during that long drought. And then after that drought, we headed it back into a wetter cycle. And it seemed like it maybe took a decade
or
so for things to get back to the other type of the vegetation that was there before. I don't know for a lot of the ecosystems how long it took the other ones.
Okay. Well, that seems to me, as far as geological time or time periods go, that seems to be like a rapid shift indeed. So perhaps there happens to be a great deal of hope here, or so one imagines. And then I want to get back to my own question. That more or less answers Joel's questions. And now I would like to ask as to how your analysis of long-term weather patterns over immensely long periods of time, how this ties in to the current perception of so-called global warming. Is it exacerbated, or and what about the actual causal factors here? Are the causal factors entirely different, or more or less the same?
You mean these past droughts? Were they caused by?
Yeah.
Well, no, they're different. They were different in the past. So in the past, the droughts were either caused by some condition of the Pacific Ocean that got in a more La Nina type background state, which is when we have La Nina, we have drier conditions in this region. Or even sunspot cycles have been implicated for these 200-year cycles. And whereas global warming is caused by increased carbon dioxide. So, and we don't really know how these are going to interact, but we are potentially going into a drier period naturally, and then global warming is supposed to make this region drier. So, we don't know exactly what that'll look like, but it could exacerbate the situation and create more climate extremes, drier, but then also bigger floods, so we're going to see more extreme climate.
Extreme climate. So in other words, it is not so much. I mean, we have a prospect of the West drying out, but over superimposed on that, we also have a prospect of genuine extremes of large swings from one sort of condition to another sort of condition. I understand that. In thinking about this, I wonder whether the people of California, by what the people of California can do, by way of urban intensive gardening, by way of planting urban lots, parks, and even rooftops, and turning them into edible landscapes. Can we take action to create microecology, so to speak, that might possibly make a difference? And the reason why I'm asking, because in our own work here in Berkeley, and in traveling around the state and in interacting with so many people in so many places, especially with California farmers and with people in our business here and so forth, we see here in California, there is so much energy. There is so much creativity, and especially here at the university, which is a great epicenter, of course. And we're wondering, is it at all possible for ordinary people, through biodynamic French-intensive agriculture, for example, to create microclimates, to do mini beds, and all of, if you walk the streets here in Berkeley in the early morning, you hear the buzzing of bees. People have beehives in their backyard. You hear chickens clucking in people's backyards. So people are sensing that something is coming down here, and they're doing as much as they can. Things such as planting fruit trees in their front yards, and creating raised beds, raised intensive vegetable beds in their backyards. is there any possibility that the establishment of such microecologies might at least mitigate things to some extent?
I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that, but I would think that in terms of that kind of thing, of everybody doing what they can for that, as well as just in water conservation and even starting to recycle water more, use gray water, rainwater harvesting. There's all kinds of things that we could all be doing that I think if everybody did it, could really have a collective benefit and get us through this.
Yeah, because just the prospect of 38 million hands focused on redeeming the state, on on turning every single public park, every rooftop into an edible landscape. The power of those people, especially the power of focused energy, as we see every single day, is so phenomenal. If only it was focused in more constructive and purposeful ways.
Right, I agree with that, yeah.
So those complete the questions that I have.
Okay.
And Lynn, I would like to thank you for your closely reasoned comments that have helped us to understand more deeply and profoundly the ecology of this California and the changes that it is rapidly undergoing. Thank you so very, very much indeed.
You're very welcome.
A privilege indeed. Thank you.
Thanks.